Hi there, listeners of Accents, a podcast for literature, arts, and culture. I'm your host, Katerina Stoykova, and I have the pleasure of serving as the director of the Kentucky Book Festival, a program of Kentucky Humanities. The next installment of KBF will take place on November 2nd at Joseph Beth Booksellers from 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Today's episode features a friend and a supporter of the festival, Chris Williams, Senior Vice President of Communications at Kosair for Kids, one of the sponsors of this year's festival. Hi, Chris, and welcome to Accents.
Katerina, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Tell us one thing we likely know about your organization and one thing we likely don't know.
Thing I hope people know is that for 101 years, Kosair for Kids has helped children in all 120 Kentucky counties and 11 in southern Indiana to live life to the fullest. And we've done that through funding of medical care and equipment and therapies families can't otherwise afford, research, education, social services, and child advocacy. The thing I don't know everybody is aware of is some of the really cool brushes with history we've had and really interesting characters that have come through our area over the last 101 years and the backstory of how we became the most comprehensive children's charity in our region.
Do you have a cool story that you want to share?
I have so many cool stories. I spent almost 25 years in television journalism, and I love telling stories about our Kosair kids and about our history. And since this is a podcast and I'm trying to prevent people from forwarding, another 15, 20 seconds, and I'm hoping that they're going to be captivated by everything you and I have to say, Katerina, I will start off with a one that I hope will grab people and think, okay, this is a podcast I have to keep listening to. In 1960, Cassius Clay, later Muhammad Ali, a Louisville native, had gone off and had won the gold medal at the Olympics. And he came home and was going to start his professional prize fighting career. In October of 1960, he faced Toonie Hunsaker in a bout here in Louisville. And what they were going to do is they wanted to get as much public attention for this as possible. Well, Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, decided that he would come and visit the kids at the Kosair Crippled Children Hospital, which was our hospital, and he would donate his entire fight proceeds to our hospital. This was an interesting story, and you can see a little bit about it when you go to the Ali Center, when you look at some of the history. It's a footnote there. But as we were ready to celebrate our 100th anniversary last year, we sat down with Lani Ali, Muhammad's widow, and we wanted to ask her about that because she actually did not know the story. And so she was fascinated by it, but she was not surprised. And it was his first documented philanthropy was him donating his proceeds to the 1960 fight to the Kosair Crippled Children Hospital. It wouldn't be his last, but it was a first gesture of what would become known as possibly the greatest philanthropist of all time.
Oh, that's amazing. It says a lot about the kind of person that he
Yeah.
was.
What I understood from Lani Ali was that he had an affinity for children. He loved children, and he loved to try to inspire children to greatness. He wanted to inspire children to do the right thing and to live great lives. And he was such a physical specimen. He was this amazing prize fighter and had this physique and he was magnetic. In the 1960 Olympics, he drew so much attention, and we saw that through his professional career. But Lonnie said that she was certain that at some point in his life, he probably was drawn to Kosair kids and other children like them because he had this gift, and he knew that they were facing some hurdles that most of us could never fully appreciate, and that probably touched his heart, that he wanted to let them know that he cared about them and he loved them, and that's why he wanted to be involved with Kosair Crippled Children Hospital in 1960. How that all came about and how we became something, a lot of people know the name Kosair Charities. Just about 2 years ago, we underwent a brand study to find out what people thought of us and how they saw us. And my boss, Barry Dunn, the president of Kosair Charities, now Kosair for Kids, one of the questions that we raised and Barry raised was, if you were to come into Kentucky or Southern Indiana, if you were to see a sign that said Kosair Charities, what would you think? Would you think it was a charity for a book club? Would you think it was a charity to save the whales or something like that? And that we needed to put in the forefront of our name what we had been about for 100 years, and that was the kids. And people already have called the kids who were patients at the Kosair Crippled Children's Hospital or the Kosair Children's Hospital that would later become well-known in Louisville. People call them Kosair kids. So by changing our name to Kosair for Kids, which we did officially about a year and a half ago, it put in the forefront what we've been about for over 100 years now, and that is the kids. I mean, when you talk about changing the name of an organization that has the love and admiration that we have because of what we've been able to do, the generational impact that we've had for over 100 years now, that's a very serious thing to undertake. And there was a lot of soul searching on whether we would do anything. But this Kosair for Kids change that we undertook about a year and a half ago, I think it was a great idea. I think that it has been extremely well received. And I think it made a lot of sense to do this.
It's a very strong statement. Can you tell me about the relationship with Face It?
In 2013, Kosair for Kids, Kosair Charities at the time, and 9 partners, including Kentucky Youth Advocates, were in a room. And at the time, Kentucky ranked the worst in instances of child abuse and neglect in the nation. And the 10 partners that were in that room sat back and said, what are we going to do? And one of the people in the room pointed out that in 10 years, that Kosair Charities Committee, Inc. would turn 100. And so we needed a new movement. We needed to vow that within 10 years, we would end child abuse and neglect in Kentucky. Now, just saying that aloud it sounds like a very lofty goal, changing, society, changing the hearts and minds of everyone, and going from worst in the nation to having no child abuse and neglect, which is what we all dream of someday. But doing that in 10 years sounds, pretty crazy. But what these 10 partners did, including Kosair for Kids, was we created the Face It movement, and we started this alliance. Now we have almost 200 partners that range across the Commonwealth of Kentucky. In the last 5 years, we've reduced the rates of child abuse and neglect by 48%. The instances of child abuse and neglect have dropped by 48%. We went from being at 1.6 worst in the nation to the last federal study showing that we're now 14th worst in the nation. And while we have made great strides, there is so much more to do. We're doing that with our partners at agencies across the Commonwealth who are focusing on advocacy, focusing on reforming the child welfare system, focusing on giving parents learning tools to try to prevent the cycle of violence and ending the cycle of violence, and helping children speak up for themselves.
Well, that's amazing to me, to have a clear goal. You call it lofty, I call it noble, and it's wonderful to have the problems talked about.
We have so many amazing and extraordinary partners in the Face It movement. Everything from agencies that you would expect to be involved in something like this, to forensic pediatricians in the state who are helping children on the worst days of their lives, doing jobs that you just wish no one had to be a part of, to a group that we met recently, the Kentucky Kids on the Block. They're based out of Bowling Green, and it's a troupe of puppeteers, and they received a Kosair for Kids grant. And I see the smile on your face. Now, people listening to this podcast probably can hear me smiling now as I describe the smile on your face, Katerina. But these puppeteers go into schools and they talk to kids about boundaries, and they talk about how to protect themselves and things of this nature. When I first heard about that grant, I thought, from my skeptical journalist background, I was thinking, okay, why are we investing in these puppets, and really do they work? And then I found the heartbreaking stat that within 3 days of going into these schools, these puppeteers are learning that someone in the school comes forward and now feels open to talk to an authority figure about an instance of abuse or neglect. And so what the Kentucky Kids on the Block are doing is extremely valuable at helping children not only recognize situations, understand how to protect themselves from situations, but just as importantly, speak up and ask for help and find an authority figure that they can trust to help get them out of a situation that is something none of us want to have to deal with.
And what are your organization's goals this year?
Our goal is to help more children spread more joy, hope, and care in the second century service than we did in our first. Every year, we make it a goal to help children through our Kosair Kids Financial Assistance Program, and we budget $1 million. What the Kosair Kids Financial Assistance Program does is it pays for medical bills, therapies, and equipment that families cannot otherwise afford. People can go to kosair.org and look for the financial assistance program, and they can file an application. It's all financial based. Again, that's kosair.org. And if you have a child in your family, or you know someone who's struggling with a medical bill, a therapy, or a piece of equipment they just can't afford, their insurance has turned them down, or they have an insurance deductible that's just not sustainable, we will take a look at that and we'll consider whether we can hop in and help. We budget about $1 million for that every year, Katerina, and that is what our boss says. Barry and the board say, look, if we go over budget on anything, we want to go over budget on that. That is why we're here. We're here to help children. And I had a stat that just as of a couple of days ago, we had helped about 159 children in this year alone in the Kosair Kids Financial Assistance Program. And that amount was over $700,000 worth of equipment, therapies, and medical bills that families could otherwise not afford. That is a point of pride for us, and that's a point of pride for our Kosair for Kids supporters. This is why we exist. We exist to help children overcome their hurdles. We don't believe that children should go without those medical equipments and therapies, and you know their families should go without because they simply can't afford it. And that is the one thing I hope listeners of this amazing podcast take, if they take nothing else from anything I say. Kosair.org, Financial Assistance Program, the Kosair for Kids Financial Assistance Program, KOSAIR.org. The Kosair Kids Financial Assistance Program is here as we're trying to help as many kids as possible. So if you listen to nothing else in this podcast, you share nothing else from this podcast, please remember about the Kosair Kids Financial Assistance Program.
I believe that the right people will hear the message. What would you like the future of your organization to look like? I mean, you are in your second century of operation.
We would like Kosair for Kids to continue to be actively involved and a leader in the fight to end child abuse and neglect through the Face It movement. We would like Kosair for Kids to be able to reach every child that needs help with the Kosair Kids Financial Assistance Program. We would hope that in the next century of service, we don't have to reach out as hard, that people know that we have this resource for us. And we also, in the second century of service, have already started to do more Kosair Kids experiences. People have known us for a long time to have holiday parties where kids come and they meet Santa and they get a present and they get a chance to be around kids who are like them. Those days date all the way back to the Kosair Crippled Children Hospital back in the 1920s. And we have these amazing stories about people who were patients at the time at our hospital. But over the last 2 or 3 decades, we've had this really incredible Christmas party, holiday party. And we also do a Boo at the Zoo, a night at the zoo, where families of children who are especially blessed can come. And the night is really tailored to their needs. And it sensory friendly for Kosair kids at the zoo that night. Well, over the last couple of years, we've added to those experiences. We want every child to feel loved and appreciated and special. And so we have taken a couple of kids down to Houston, Texas, where the University of Louisville Cardinals baseball team was playing in the Shriners Classic baseball tournament. And they threw out the first pitch at a major league field down in Houston, Texas. We took a couple of kids to the Shriner football game in Dallas, Texas this year, where they had a chance to be a part of things. And we had a back to school bash this year. And so these are not necessarily all Kosair kids that you would think of having medical hurdles that they've overcome or that they face and we've been involved with. But some of these children are living in communities that are underserved, that they need opportunities to just be a kid, to experience feeling special, to experience some educational opportunity that they might not get otherwise. So in the next century, I would anticipate there will be a lot more Kosair Kids experiences that will touch the lives of a lot more kids in more ways. Like last year, when we had our first Kosair Kids Princess Tea at the Kentucky Castle. We did it again this year. We rented out the Kentucky Castle and for sales, and the UK dance team did the hair and makeup of about 30 Kosair kids. And we had a generous donor named Elise, who was their fairy godmother, bought them all the Disney princess dresses of their favorite princess. And then they got to go into the castle to a special tea party with real princesses. And those types of opportunities for children are very important to us so that kids get a chance to feel special.
So what motivated you to support the Kentucky Book Festival?
Well, we know that the people who care about the Kentucky Book Festival are the kinds of people who care about philanthropy in their communities. They're the kinds of people who hear these amazing stories of Kosair kids throughout the years and the people who come in contact with them, and they care about the impact that they have had in their community. So the Kentucky Book Festival is a really special event, and it draws some very smart people together who are very interested in whether they're real tales or whether they're tales that have been spun from the imagination. They're great stories. And Kosair kids have incredible stories. And that's one reason why I like working here, is being able to tell some of those tales. But I think what the book festival does is it brings the curious Kentuckian into a place, a community where they share that same trait, that same character trait. And so if the curiosity of the folks who attend the book festival is just right up our alley. Those are the kinds of people who will hear our message or may know about us and tell those stories when they go home.
And I would love to hear another Kosair for Kids history story.
Okay, this is where it begins. In 1923, the Shriners were announcing where they were going to build hospitals around the world, and they left Louisville, Kentucky off the map. A Kosair Shriner named Dr. W. Barnett Owen was an orthopedic surgeon, and he knew that children in the Louisville area needed an orthopedic children's hospital. And he wasn't happy that the Shriners internationally were not going to build one here. So he and some of his partners did an outreach, and they found a little boy named Tommy in the hills of eastern Kentucky. Tommy was 12 years old and had never walked without the aid of crutches. He had been stricken with infantile paralysis, which we would later know as polio. Well, they brought Tommy to Louisville. They performed surgery, and over 6 months, they did some therapies on him. And in August of 1923, the newspapers write about a party with 11,000 people in attendance, and Tommy walking across the stage unaided, without crutches, and there not being a dry eye in the house. And Kosair Charities Committee, Inc. really began at that moment, and the fundraising began at that moment. In 1926, hospital opened on Eastern Parkway, the Kosair Crippled Children Hospital, the first orthopedic children's hospital in Kentucky. And the legacy began. There are so many stories to tell. And my boss and I used to talk when I first started here just over 2 years ago. I said, I have more content coming into this building than I have time to tell the stories about or to communicate to the public. And he said, no. He didn't really believe me. And about a year ago, we sat down for something, and he said, you know, I always thought you were full of it when you talked about that there was more content, but now I see it. And we have those types of stories. That we had a gentleman walk in a couple of summers ago. He came in and wanted to talk to the president, and our person answering the front door said, yeah, Barry's here. Barry always talks to people. He's the president of Kosair for Kids. And this gentleman walked in with a box. Said he just finally got around to cleaning out the house that his parents had lived in. They had died a few years ago, and this guy was roughly 80 years old. And he said there was an artifact that he thought we would want. And he opens the box, and inside the box is an old leather shoe attached to a metal brace, and there's a leather strap around that wraps around the top of the brace, around the outside of it. And this leather shoe looks like something you would see in a museum. And he said that this belonged to his little sister, Julie. And his little sister, Julie, was now in her 70s. And she had been a patient at the Kosair Crippled Children Hospital. She had scoliosis and was being treated. By the way, the first scoliosis surgery in Kentucky was performed by Dr. Kenton Leatherman in our building on Eastern Parkway. And she had been a patient of Dr. Leatherman. And as this brother was showing us this boot and this brace that was made at our brace shop, he pointed on the inside of the leather strap, and his little sister's name, Julie, was engraved in the leather strap. They did that so that the kids lost their brace, they would know who it belonged to. And he talked about how Julie was 5 years old when she was here, and she could never pronounce the name Leatherman. She called Dr. Leatherman Dr. Walk because that's what he did for her.
Wow.
Yeah, it gives you goosebumps. And so those kinds of stories just walk into our door. We have started to put together a small history book for our donors. We're in the process of creating a history book. But the hardest thing about creating a history book for a place with as rich a history as Kosair for Kids,
Tell
it's
me.
the editing process. Well, how do you cut stuff out? You know who Diane Fossey was? Have you ever read the book Gorillas in the Mist or seen the movie Gorillas in the Mist? Sigourney Weaver won a Gold Globe for that. Diane Fossey went into the jungles of Africa and saved the mountain gorilla from extinction. In 1950, Diane Fossey was the director of occupational therapy at the Kosair Crippled Children Hospital on Eastern Parkway in Louisville, Kentucky.
Well, how about that?
Yes. And so she left her career here and then went off and did her amazing work in Africa. We met a gentleman recently who was an x-ray tech from the 1950s into the mid 1960s, was here for almost 20 years. And he talked about how he would do the crossword in the morning with Diane Fossey in the break room. He was the x-ray technician here. And so when you meet people and you find out when they hear the name Kosair, a lot of them say, I'm a Kosair kid, or I know a Kosair kid. How do you edit a 100-year history book with so many rich stories?
I can totally see how it would be difficult to figure out what to put in a book, how to give one story preference over another, but it will be a worthwhile read. And thank you for coming to Accents, and I'll see you at the festival, November 2nd, 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at Joseph Beth in Lexington.
Thank you so much for having us and letting me spread the message of what Kosair for Kids does, and to remind people about the Kosair for Kids Financial Assistance Program, which is there to help families pay for medical bills, equipment, and therapies that they can't otherwise afford at kosair.org.